Every day we make decisions, and some of those are very difficult. Should I go to college or work full-time? Should I get married? Should I have children? But most decisions are easy. Should I take the bus or drive my car? Should I eat at Burger King or Dairy Queen? Microeconomics in particular is concerned with trying to understand the decision-making process. The tools we'll introduce in this class will help clarify decision-making and may help you make better decisions in your life. Well, here's a simple example. It's 9:45 and I have a 9:55 econ class. The parking lot's fairly full. Should I keep on driving and hope to find a parking place closer in, or should I walk? Well, what I'm really doing is making an economics decision. It's economics because my time is scarce. If I find a parking place close in, it'll only take 5 minutes to walk to class. If I can find a parking place far away, which I'm assured of, it'll take 15 minutes to walk to class. In making the decisions, what I really want to do is to balance the costs and the benefits of each alternative. My intuition tells me that the benefits of parking far away exceeds the cost of trying to find a place closer in. Well, in other words, the 15 minutes it's going to take me to walk is less than the time it would take to find a parking place. I want to answer some fundamental questions about how individuals make choices. As we said before, microeconomics is concerned with how individuals, firms, and society allocate their scarce resources to achieve their objectives. The underlying assumption in microeconomics is that in allocating resources, agents choose rationally. Rational choice means that individuals allocate their resources in such a way so as to enable them to achieve their goals. The need to make rational choices arises because goods are scarce. We lack sufficient income for all the things we'd like to buy, or we lack sufficient time to do all the things we'd like to do. So rational choice lies at the very heart of microeconomics. In this segment and those that follow, we're concerned with how consumers make choices. Consumers are economic agents who purchase goods and services and are confronted with four basic questions. Well, which goods should be purchased? This, of course, is a matter of preference. But once it's determined what to buy, the next question is, how much of each good should be purchased? The demands for goods supposes an income. Most of us obtain our income by selling our labor. So this leads us to our third question, how much labor should be supplied? Should I work 5 or 50 hours a week? But how much labor I supply is affected by another consideration. If I choose to labor very little, I may not have sufficient income to buy all those things I want. In that case, I have to borrow. And on the other hand, if I choose to work a lot, I may have more than enough income to buy those things I want, and I may have some left over for the future. So this raises the fourth question. How much should I spend today versus save for the future? As we talked about earlier, individuals are forced to make decisions because of the existence of scarcity. Scarcity forces us to make choices. Every choice to consume something is a choice not to consume something else. So how do individuals make these choices? Let's consider the first question. Which good should one consume? The question seems simple enough, and often it is. But there are those times in which you're confronted with a choice. Should you go to school this quarter or spend the next month in Mexico? If you choose school, you give up a trip. And if you vacation, you can't go to school. The choice you make is assumed to be the one that gives you the most utility. So what's that? Utility is associated with satisfaction, pleasure, or happiness. In economics, we assume that individuals are essentially hedonists. They do what feels good. Now, utility is an ambiguous concept because it's inherently subjective. What feels good to one person may not feel good to another. I may enjoy opera and another may enjoy bullfights. It's all a matter of individual preference.
Historical Moments with John Watkins, Ph.D.
Microeconomics presupposes a particular concept of human nature, that of Homo economicus, rational economic man. This view of human nature derives from the philosophy of utilitarianism. The founder of utilitarianism was a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham. Bentham defined human nature as follows: nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. On the one hand, the standard of right and wrong; on the other, the chain of causes and effects are fastened to their throne. They govern us in all we do, in all we say, in all we think. Every effort we can make to throw off our subjection will serve but to demonstrate and confirm it. In words, a man may pretend to abjure their empire, but in reality he will remain subject to it all the while. The principle of utility recognizes this subjection and assumes it for the foundation of the system, the object of which is to rear the fabric of felicity by the hands of reason and of law. Eccentric in manner, Bentham sought to reform Britain's legal system by basing it on the principle of utility. He believed that by manipulating pain and pleasure, individuals could be led to do what was in society's interest, as determined by the legislature. In other words, his theory leads to the view that society can be engineered, assuming that individuals are rational, and by further making the expected cost of a crime exceed the expected benefit, crime could be eliminated.
Some choices are based on customs and habits. Other choices are based on altruism. Still others are linked to pure self-interest.
Human behavior that's different from this model of the isolated, selfish individual is a picture of people that work together cooperatively. Now here, the people are calculating that they'll be better off if they participate in this cooperative effort, so there's a degree of selfishness involved, but their calculations lead them to believe that if they work with other people, instead of working against other people, instead of trying to step over other people to get ahead, instead of being involved in competition with everybody else, if they cooperate with everybody else, that they will be better off as a result. And again, there's many, many examples of institutions throughout history. You can think of the examples that people talk about, the barn raising that we're all familiar with in the history of the United States, where people cooperate to get things done. There's plenty of examples of people that have behaved this way instead of according to the model of the isolated, selfish individual. So for the claims that markets are necessary because of human nature, there's a lot of questions as to what human nature is actually like.
Psychologists, marketing executives, sociologists, historians, and physiologists have all concerned themselves with the mechanics of individual decision-making and offer differing perspectives.
There are a lot of things that influence consumers, that convince them to move in a certain direction. A lot of it has to do with I would say, is kind of the theory of chaos. You really can't tell exactly what's going to happen because there are so many variables that are unpredictable and so many things that happen coincidentally that you have no control over. So a particular pattern or a direction that works today may blow up in your face a little while down the road as society changes, as things evolve. There's a theory that says advertising is selling to a moving parade. And that's very, very accurate, actually, because things are constantly changing. However, amid this theory of chaos, just like economics or computer science or any of the other sciences, you can come up with certain patterns and certain things that do motivate and that as a general rule will continue to convince consumers to purchase products. A couple of those, for example, would be association, feeling like you're part of the group, feeling like you're getting along with the people that are important to you. You can enhance that aspect by putting in a star factor, someone that is readily identifiable by the masses as someone that appeals to them and someone that they want to be like or emulates an aspect of life that they wish they possessed. So that's always one way to get people to move into a particular position. Fear is a wonderful factor, in fact, for motivation towards sales. In fact, that's almost been the exclusive domain of politics for the last several years. In fact, you notice that there's a lot of talk about crime. There's a lot of discussion about how you're unsafe in your neighborhood, where I haven't seen statistical studies, but I would happen to think that we're a considerably safer society and a considerably more civilized society than, say, Tombstone, Arizona in the 1830s and 40s. And yet everybody's afraid to walk outside their door because of crime. And of course that allows a politician to say, I'll get tough and do something about it, solve that fear. Fear is probably, in my opinion, the greatest motivator of all, because it covers all demographics, it covers all economic scales. Everybody's afraid of something. This sounds, I know, kind of mercenary, but you asked specifically what motivates, and if you want to break down political campaigns in particular, you will see that the use of fear is very, very strong. It's very blatant. It's very cutting. There was a recent congressional campaign where the ad ran that a woman is raped every 15 minutes, and that's put the fear into just about everyone. And of course, he had a law enforcement background, so as a result, he was the one to solve this problem. Greed is also a motivating factor. The ability to make money. You see this a lot on the new televised courses, the infomercials, 30-minute programs that tell people that just by buying this course they can make millions and millions of dollars. And so people sign up for those courses left and right. The other element is, one other element is say vanity. You see the same thing with the Ab Roller Plus and 1,500 different exercise machines that range in a variety of prices and do a variety of effective jobs, when really you don't really need the Ab Roller Plus. You could probably just do body crunches and come up with the same results. So there are a lot of things that motivate and that encourage consumers to buy, and those are just a few of them.
In microeconomics, we assume that utility depends on the quantity of goods and services that one consumes. The more goods and services one consumes, the better off one is. The early economists, in fact, believed that utility was measurable. It's what they called cardinal utility. Cardinal utility means that utility is additive, and the measure of utility they used was a util, and it was linked to money. Of course, there are difficulties in using money as a measure of satisfaction, but we'll deal with those problems later. Right now, we just want to illustrate the basic idea of how people make choices. But it's easier to illustrate if we assume utility is measurable. We begin with a definition of total utility. It's the satisfaction derived from consuming a quantity of a good in a specified amount of time. Secondly, we define marginal utility as the increment in satisfaction derived from consuming one more unit of a good. Now, marginal utility is the slope of the total utility function, and marginal and total utility are related by the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility states, as a person consumes successive units of a good, satisfaction increases but at a decreasing rate. Put differently, as a person consumes successive units of a good, the satisfaction derived from each successive unit declines. Each unit consumed yields less satisfaction than the one before it. Let's do a thought experiment and construct a table relating quantity, marginal utility, and total utility. Well, let's say it's been about 6 months since you had a taste of pizza and you'd do anything for a slice. The first slice you buy tastes delicious. It gives you 20 utils of pleasure. The second slice is good, but not quite as good as the first. It yields only 10 utils of pleasure. The third slice yields even less, 5 utils of pleasure. So what's happening? Well, we get less and less satisfaction from each additional unit. Based on this data, we can generate graphs for marginal and total utility. The total utility curve shows us our overall level of satisfaction. At our first slice, total utility is 20, then moves to 30, then to 35, and so on. The marginal utility curve plots the incremental gain from 20 to 10 and to 5. As the total utility curve flattens out, the marginal utility curve drops to 0. So total utility explains what goods consumers will buy. And that brings us to our second question: how many goods should be consumed? Remember, in microeconomics, we assume that individuals act rationally, and that means to maximize utility. So to answer this question, we'll construct a demand curve. Now, if we assume that $1 equals 1 util, the diminishing marginal utility curve becomes a demand curve. The demand curve relates the prices that the individual would be willing to pay at different quantities, but it doesn't reflect the actual price. For example, if the first slice of pizza gave 30 utils of pleasure, you would be willing to pay $30. Remember, this is what you'd be willing to pay, but it's not the price you have to pay. And this is the key to the concept of rational choice. The concept underlying the idea behind rational choice is that individuals weigh the cost, which is the market price, and the benefits, which is marginal utility, at the margin. And that is, they compare the costs and benefits for each additional good consumed. The equilibrium condition for utility maximization is this: that the marginal utility would be equal to the market price. The individual will consume up to the point that the marginal utility equals the market price. Here's the underlying intuition. Each unit consumed prior to equilibrium yields more utility than the individual gives up to purchase it, and each good consumed after equilibrium yields less utility than the individual gave up to buy it. So the individual maximizes utility at equilibrium. The idea of equilibrium can be demonstrated using the concept of consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between the price the individual would be willing to pay and what he or she actually pays, if the alternative is to do without the good. So it's the difference between the total utility received and the utility given up to buy the good. In other words, it's the satisfaction derived over and above what the individual actually pays. In our example, assume the following. The market price is $6 and $1 equals 1 util. This table helps explain the concept of rational choice. The first column shows the quantities from 1 to 4. The second column shows us the marginal utility. The first unit gives 9, then 8, 6, and then 4. Let's say this represents willingness to pay. In the third column, we see the market price, which is 6. The difference between willingness to pay and price is the net gain. When we add these values up, we get consumer surplus. Well, here's how it works. Our consumer is willing to pay $9 for the first unit, but since the market price is just $6, that gives her a $3 benefit. Because of diminishing marginal utility, she's only willing to pay $8 for the second unit, but it's a good deal too because the price is again just $6. After buying the second unit, her total consumer surplus is 5, which is equal to 3 plus 2. At 3 units, willingness to pay just matches price, and at 4 units, willingness to pay is less than the price. So if she acts rationally, she'll never buy this much. Economists assume consumers weigh the benefits and costs of each unit until the satisfaction derived from consuming one more unit just equals the cost. And when that happens, consumer surplus is maximized. We'll see this process of weighing the marginal benefit and the marginal cost throughout the class, whether we're talking about producers maximizing profits or politicians maximizing the probability of being elected. It's one of the most important, powerful tools you can learn. The third question that consumers think about is how much labor to supply. Because labor isn't one of the most enjoyable things we do, we have to relate it to our model of utility maximization. People get utility from things like mountain bikes, skis, trips to Mexico, things that make them happy. But to get these things, you need money. And where does that come from? Well, usually by working. The idea is that people work so long as the marginal utility of income exceeds the marginal disutility of labor. Again, it's a comparison of the marginal benefit, our income, with the marginal cost, which is the value of our leisure time. We can express it like this. Most people compare the wage rate they receive with the disutility of labor. Assume for the moment that the wage rate is $10 per hour. As the person works, the disutility of labor rises. Over the length of the day, she becomes tired, her work becomes increasingly boring, and she wants to do something else. The graph below illustrates this meaning. Note that the wage rate is constant at $10. Initially, the disutility of labor is relatively low because the person is fresh. But as the hours pass, increasingly work becomes less pleasant. When the disutility of work exceeds the wage rate, the individual stops working. And to induce the individual to work longer, we must pay them more. This is reflected in the fact that many businesses pay their workers more for overtime or holidays. Note, too, that the disutility of labor curve reflects the effect of the supply of labor. The supply curve for labor can actually look a bit strange. Initially, as you get a pay raise, you probably work more hours. A pay increase means that the opportunity cost of not working has risen. So at some point, you work more. But as your wage rate increases, this no longer happens. Your desire for leisure outweighs your inclination to work more, and your supply of labor bends backward. In effect, you are choosing to purchase more leisure when your wage rate increases. Now let's talk about our fourth question, how much to spend or save. Many people buy on credit, so they're not choosing to trade work for leisure, but are instead choosing to trade future consumption for present consumption. But of course, because of interest charges, consumers who borrow won't have as much to consume in the future as they would otherwise. Here's an example. Let's say you buy skis, a television, and other things and incur a $5,000 debt. Let's also say that the credit card company charges 18% interest, and you're going to pay this over a 3-year period. Well, how much interest would you pay? Well, it's about $1,400. It's as though you had waited. You could have purchased another pair of skis, a VCR, and a camcorder as well, or paid for tuition for the year. In effect, your willingness to pay that interest reflects your preference now to have those things instead of waiting. Now, why would somebody do that? Well, there are all kinds of reasons. As we mentioned, the most important is that people prefer to have the items now rather than wait. But there are other reasons as well. Perhaps people have an emergency, perhaps they have a lapse of income, perhaps they go into debt to make an investment. In fact, many of you might be borrowing to finance your college education, and you're probably making the right decision because the benefits of a college degree exceed the costs, including the implicit and explicit costs. Well, now let's review. First, economists assume that individuals are rational. That is, the individuals try to maximize utility or to minimize disutility. Utility or happiness depends on the quantity of goods and services consumed. So the more goods and services consumed, the happier we are. Second, we noted that individuals make choices based on weighing costs and benefits. But most importantly, choices are made at the margin. That is, individuals weigh the costs and benefits of one more unit. So if the benefits of one more unit, what we call the marginal utility, exceeds the price, then we go ahead and buy it. But if the benefits of one more unit are less than the price, then we don't. Third, we note that buying goods requires income. People earn income by selling productive factors, land, capital, entrepreneurship, or labor. But for most of us, income comes from the selling of our labor. The question becomes, how much labor do I sell on the market, which is how much time do I spend working? This, too, is based on rational choice. I continue to work so long as the marginal utility of income from working one more hour exceeds the disutility of labor. Fourth, many people choose not to work more. Instead, they may choose to trade off future consumption for present consumption. And in this, too, they are using rational choice. They decide that the benefits of spending in the present outweigh the costs of not consuming in the future. The concept of rational choice pervades our society. In this segment, we've tried to convey the basic idea, the idea of weighing the costs and benefits. In the next segments, we'll try to make it more realistic by considering limited incomes. So stay tuned.